You wake up at 3 a.m. and it's already there. Not a sound, not a threat, not a single thing actually wrong in the room around you. Just that feeling, that low electric hum of dread sitting on your chest like something heavy that doesn't have a name. Your heart is doing too much. Your thoughts are already 5 catastrophic steps ahead of reality. And the worst part? You can't explain it. Nothing happened, nothing is happening, but your brain is treating right now like it's the most dangerous moment of your life. Sound familiar? Here's what nobody tells you. That feeling isn't a warning, it's a glitch. Your brain, the most sophisticated biological computer on the planet, is running a program so old, so outdated, so completely divorced from your actual life that it's essentially crashing your operating system over emails, traffic, and hypothetical conversations that haven't happened yet. And here's the part that will change everything for you. You don't fix a glitch by fighting it. You fix it by understanding it, and then refusing to take it seriously. This isn't a book about surviving anxiety. It's about becoming someone anxiety can no longer touch. What you're about to read isn't therapy speak or surface-level advice. This is a deep, honest, sometimes uncomfortable look at exactly why your brain generates anxiety, what it's actually trying to do, and, most importantly, how to stop treating it like the emergency it pretends to be. 15 chapters. One fundamental shift in how you see your own mind. Let's begin. The glitch in your brain. Let's start with the truth. Most books are too polite to tell you. Anxiety is not wise, it is not insightful, it is not a spiritual messenger or a profound signal from your higher self asking you to pay attention. Anxiety is a simulation, a vivid, emotionally convincing, neurologically expensive movie that your brain is producing about disasters that, in the overwhelming majority of cases, will never actually happen. Think about the last time you felt genuinely anxious. Really bring it back. Now ask yourself, did the thing you feared actually happen? If you're like most people, the answer is no. Or if it did happen, it wasn't nearly as catastrophic as your brain insisted it would be. So why does the brain keep doing this? Why does this hyper-intelligent organ, the thing that can compose symphonies, build cities, and fall in love, keep generating these elaborate horror movies about the future? Because it was designed to. And the design is ancient. Somewhere between 50,000 and 200,000 years ago, the human beings who survived long enough to pass on their genes were not the optimists. They were not the ones who sat by the fire thinking, "I'm sure that rustling in the bushes is nothing." They were the ones who assumed the worst, got their adrenaline moving, and ran. That hypervigilance was genius then. It kept humans alive in an environment where real, physical threats were constant and immediate. The problem is that evolution doesn't update quickly. Your brain in 2025 is still running the same core operating system as your ancestor who lived in a world of predators and famine. The hardware has barely changed, but the world has changed completely. There are no predators in your inbox. The presentation you're dreading will not end your physical life. The text message you haven't received back is not a sign that you've been abandoned by your tribe and left to die alone in the wilderness. But your amygdala, the brain's ancient alarm center, doesn't know that. It cannot tell the difference between a saber-toothed tiger and a difficult conversation with your boss. Both register as threat. Both get the same biochemical response, cortisol flooding your bloodstream, heart rate spiking, rational thought going offline. This is why, when anxiety hits, you suddenly can't think straight. It's not weakness. It's by design. Your brain is pulling blood away from your prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for logic, nuance, and calm decision-making, and redirecting it to the survival centers. You're being physically primed to fight or run in a world where neither response is appropriate. You don't need to run from a work email, but your nervous system doesn't know that. Here is the most important reframe in this entire book. Anxiety is not a character flaw, it's a software error. It's your brain running version 1.0 of threat detection in a version 21.0 world, and you cannot update the software by arguing with it. You cannot scare it into behaving. You cannot white-knuckle your way to calm. The moment you start fighting anxiety, you've already lost, because the fight itself confirms to your brain that something worth fighting is happening. The solution is not combat. The solution is disengagement. When you stop giving anxiety an audience, when you stop treating every alarm bell as a genuine emergency, something remarkable happens. The program loses power. Not immediately, not perfectly, but consistently and permanently. Throughout this book, you're going to learn exactly how to do that. Not through willpower, not through pretending, through understanding your brain so thoroughly that its old tricks simply stop working. What's actually feeding it? You cannot drain a swamp without finding the source of the water. Most people approach anxiety the same way you'd approach a flooded basement with a bucket. They manage symptoms, they breathe, they distract themselves, they white-knuckle through. And then the anxiety comes back, because the pipes are still leaking. So, let's find the pipes. The perfectionism pipeline. One of the most reliable anxiety factories is the belief, often unconscious, that if you plan hard enough, worry thoroughly enough, and anticipate every possible problem, you can prevent bad things from happening. This is perfectionism, and it is a lie your nervous system tells itself. Perfectionism masquerades as ambition, responsibility, and high standards. But underneath, it's fear. It's the belief that you are only safe, only lovable, only acceptable when you perform flawlessly. And since flawless performance is impossible, the perfectionist mind is perpetually behind, perpetually threatened, perpetually scanning for the mistake that will finally expose them. The perfectionist brain never rests. There is always something more to fix, improve, prevent, or worry about. It's not a work ethic, it's an anxiety engine with a productivity disguise. The certainty addiction. Your anxious brain is addicted to certainty the way some people are addicted to sugar. It wants guarantees. It wants to know how the story ends before it agrees to participate. Will this work out? Will they like me? Am I going to be okay? But life doesn't offer guarantees. And the harder you grip for certainty, the more anxious you become about the uncertainty you can't eliminate. This creates a cycle. The need for certainty generates anxiety. The anxiety intensifies the need for certainty. The certainty remains impossible. The anxiety grows. The exit from this cycle isn't finding certainty. It's developing comfort with not knowing. The body memory nobody told you about. Here's one that doesn't get enough attention. Your nervous system has a memory that operates completely independently of your conscious mind. If you've experienced genuine stress, trauma, rejection, or overwhelming pressure at any point in your life, your body stored that. Not as a clear memory with a date and a story attached, as a physiological pattern, a setting, a default posture your nervous system returns to when it senses even a faint echo of those old conditions. This is why some people feel anxious for no apparent reason during genuinely good periods of their lives. Their nervous system isn't responding to the present. It's responding to a past it hasn't been allowed to process and release. You're not broken. You're running old code on new hardware. The media machine. This one is less poetic but impossible to ignore. We live in an information environment that is specifically, deliberately engineered to keep you anxious. Fear is the most effective engagement tool ever developed. Every major news network, every social media algorithm, every advertiser that has ever tried to sell you something knows this. Outrage and fear keep you watching, clicking, scrolling. The content changes daily. The emotional state they're selling stays the same. Over time, this isn't just external anxiety, it becomes internal architecture. Your brain begins to generate worry and fear independently, even when the screen is off, because anxiety has become its default idle state. You didn't develop this on your own. It was trained into you, which means it can be untrained. The mind-body disconnect, finally, and this one matters enormously. Anxiety thrives when you live exclusively from the neck up. Modern life rewards intellectual performance so heavily that many people have essentially abandoned their bodies. They're thinking machines walking around in flesh they barely notice. But your body is not a vehicle for your brain. It is a co-equal partner in your emotional and mental experience, and when you ignore it, when you never give it movement, stillness, breath, or physical presence, it starts sending louder and louder signals to get your attention. Sometimes those signals are called anxiety. Understanding these root causes doesn't fix everything overnight, but it changes your relationship to your anxiety in a fundamental way. Instead of feeling attacked by a mysterious enemy, you start to see the mechanism. And once you see the mechanism, you can stop feeding it. The body's reset button. Here is something your doctor probably didn't have time to explain to you. You have a built-in anxiety off switch. It's biological, it's free, and it works every single time you use it correctly. It's called your parasympathetic nervous system. Your autonomic nervous system has two modes. You've probably heard of fight or flight. That's the sympathetic system, the anxiety accelerator. What gets less airtime is the counterpart, the rest and restore system, the brake, the physiological state your body is designed to return to when the threat is gone. The problem isn't that the brake doesn't work. The problem is that most people don't know how to apply it. They wait for calm to arrive on its own, but calm is a skill, and like every skill, it can be deliberately practiced. Breath. The override code. The fastest way to activate your parasympathetic system is the one tool you always have with you: your breath. Most anxious people breathe wrong, and they don't know it. Short, shallow, chest-based breathing is both a symptom of anxiety and a cause of it. When you breathe from your chest, you send a continuous biochemical signal to your brain that says, danger is present. Your brain, being a diligent responder to information, keeps the alarm running. The override is diaphragmatic breathing, slow, deep breaths from the belly. When you breathe this way, you physically activate the vagus nerve, which is the primary highway of the parasympathetic nervous system. Your heart rate slows, cortisol decreases. Rational thought comes back online. One technique worth building into your daily life: breathe in for 4 counts, hold for 7, exhale for 8. The extended exhale is the key. A long, complete exhalation is the single most direct physiological signal you can send to your nervous system that the emergency is over. Your posture is talking to your brain. Stand up and hunch forward. Collapse your chest. Bring your shoulders in toward your ears. Hold that for 10 seconds. Notice how you feel. Now, roll your shoulders back. Lift your sternum. Let your feet root into the floor. Take up space. Notice the difference. That's not psychological. That is a measurable neurological shift. Your posture doesn't just reflect your emotional state, it actively creates it. Closed, contracted posture signals vulnerability and threat to the brain. Open, expansive posture signals safety and capability. This doesn't mean forcing yourself to perform confidence you don't feel. It means using your body as an instrument for changing your internal state, because the mind-body conversation runs in both directions. Cold, heat, and your vagus nerve. Two underutilized tools for nervous system regulation, cold and warmth. Splashing cold water on your face, or taking even a 30-second cold shower, activates your vagus nerve through the dive reflex, a hardwired mammalian response that immediately slows the heart and shifts your nervous system toward calm. It sounds uncomfortable. That's because it is. It also works. On the other end of the spectrum, warmth, a hot bath, a heating pad on your chest, a warm drink held in both hands, activates the body's soothing response. Physically warm sensations register as safety, triggering relaxation pathways that anxiety cannot easily override. Movement as medicine. When anxiety hits, your body has been flooded with stress chemicals, cortisol, adrenaline, norepinephrine, that were designed to fuel physical action. If you just sit with them, they build. If you move, they metabolize. This doesn't require a gym, a 10-minute walk around the block. 5 minutes of shaking your hands and arms deliberately, stretching, dancing badly alone in your kitchen. Any physical movement that allows your body to complete the stress response cycle it started will help more than any thought-based technique. Your body isn't trying to sabotage you, it's trying to help you survive a threat. The most respectful thing you can do for it is let it do what it was designed to do, move, and then thank it for its service. The now is always safe. Here is the single most important truth about anxiety that almost no one fully absorbs. Anxiety cannot exist in the present moment. Read that again. Not as a motivational quote, as a literal neurological fact. Anxiety is temporal. It requires either a past to regret or a future to fear. It needs a timeline, a story with a beginning that went wrong or an ending that might go wrong. Without that timeline, anxiety has nothing to work with. Right now, in this exact moment, you are reading words on a page or screen. Your heart is beating, air is moving in and out of your lungs. You are physically safe, not eventually safe, not conditionally safe. Safe right now, in the only moment that actually exists. That's not spiritual positivity. That's a description of your actual present reality. The problem is that your mind refuses to stay there. It is a relentless time machine, constantly launching itself into futures that haven't happened and pasts that can't be changed. And every second it spends in those timelines is a second spent generating anxiety about events that exist only as mental simulations. Neuroscientists estimate that the average person spends nearly half their waking hours mentally somewhere other than where they physically are. Half. That's half your life being consumed by mental travel to places that either no longer exist or don't exist yet. Present moment awareness isn't a meditation technique. It's a returning, a coming home to the only place where your real life is actually occurring, and the only place where anxiety cannot follow you. The anchor. Your breath is the most reliable anchor to the present moment because it is physically impossible to breathe anywhere but now. You cannot inhale yesterday. You cannot exhale into next Tuesday. The breath is always only happening here. When your mind launches into a future catastrophe or a past regret, the breath is your fastest route back. Not by breathing in any special way, simply by noticing the breath. Feeling the air enter your nostrils, cool on the way in and warm on the way out. Feeling your rib cage expand, feeling your belly rise and fall. This is not emptying your mind. That is a myth about meditation that keeps most people from ever starting. This is simply choosing to put your attention on what's actually happening instead of on the movie your mind is running. The 5 senses protocol. Anxiety is a purely mental experience. Your senses are not. Your senses only operate in the present. They cannot hear yesterday or smell tomorrow. When anxiety starts to build, do this. Look around and deliberately notice 5 things you can actually see right now. Not think about, not remember. See. Colors, shapes, shadows, textures. Then notice 4 things you can physically feel. The temperature of the air on your skin, the pressure of your seat beneath you, the texture of what your hands are touching. 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, 1 thing you can taste. You just traveled from your anxiety, which lives in a hypothetical future, into your actual physical reality. The anxious thoughts didn't disappear, but they lost their grip. You reminded your nervous system, I am here, right now, and right now is safe. What is versus what if? The anxious mind lives in what if. What if this goes wrong? What if they're angry? What if I can't handle it? What if it all falls apart? What if questions are anxiety's native language? They are designed to generate threat. Simulations, not to find actual answers. Notice that when you ask what-if questions while anxious, you almost never land on a reassuring outcome. You land on more elaborate worst-case scenarios. The questions aren't seeking information. They're feeding the machine. The antidote is the what-is question. What is actually happening right now? What do I know to be true in this moment? What can I actually observe rather than imagine? This simple shift, from hypothetical to actual, is one of the most immediately grounding moves available to you. It doesn't solve future problems, but it removes you from a fear-based simulation and places you back in reality, where you have actual power to respond. Acceptance is not passivity. Present moment awareness includes accepting what is actually happening, even when it's uncomfortable. This is where a lot of people misunderstand this practice. Acceptance doesn't mean you're okay with every circumstance. It doesn't mean you stop working toward change. It means you stop spending energy fighting against what has already arrived. Resistance to what's already happening is one of the most exhausting things a human being can do. It accomplishes nothing. The thing you're resisting is already here, but it consumes enormous mental and physical resources. That energy, freed from the futile act of fighting the present, becomes available for actual response. The wave is already here. Stop bracing against it and start moving with it. The stories your brain keeps telling you. Your brain is not a recording device. It is a storytelling machine. And it is a particularly good storyteller when the subject is threat. The thoughts you experience as anxiety are not neutral observations about reality. They are narratives, selective, distorted, emotionally loaded interpretations of events that have been filtered through a system biased toward danger. The technical name for these distortions is cognitive distortions. The accurate name is the stories that sound true but aren't. The greatest hits of anxious storytelling. All or nothing thinking. Everything is either perfect or catastrophic. The project either succeeds completely or it's a total failure. The relationship is either ideal or it's doomed. There is no middle ground, no partial success, no gradual improvement. Life, which is almost entirely made of middles, becomes an endless series of binary verdicts. Catastrophizing. The anxious mind skips immediately to the worst possible outcome, then treats it as the most likely outcome. You make a mistake at work and your mind doesn't say, I'll need to address that. It says, I'll be fired, then unemployable, then I'll lose my apartment. Then the imagination runs downhill at speed, gaining momentum with each step. Mind reading. You become convinced you know what other people are thinking about you. Almost always, what they're thinking is something critical. They're judging your competence, your appearance, your choices. They're disappointed in you. They've already written you off. This story plays without any actual evidence because it doesn't need evidence. It's not a deduction. It's a fear wearing the costume of a fact. Fortune-telling. The future is predicted, always negatively. You won't get the job. The conversation will go badly. The trip will be ruined. The plan won't work. These predictions are delivered by the anxious mind with the confidence of certainty and accepted by the rest of your consciousness as if they came from an actual oracle rather than from a threat detection system that is systematically biased toward disaster. The confirmation. Bias problem. Once your brain decides something is threatening, it becomes a highly effective machine for finding evidence to confirm that decision. Every neutral event gets interpreted through the lens of the original fear. Every ambiguous signal becomes more proof that the worry is justified. Meanwhile, the brain quietly filters out information that would challenge the narrative. This is why anxious thinking feels so logical and justified in the moment. You're not misinterpreting a few things. Your entire perceptual system has been configured to find what it's already afraid of. Knowing this doesn't automatically break the pattern, but it does create a crucial pause. Am I actually seeing this situation clearly, or am I seeing what my anxiety needs me to see? The cognitive restructuring habit. The single most evidence-backed psychological technique for changing anxious thought patterns is cognitive restructuring, and it is simpler than it sounds. When you notice an anxious thought, don't argue with it, don't fight it or try to replace it with something positive. Instead, interrogate it like a detective who hasn't decided yet whether the story is true. Ask, what's the actual evidence for this thought? What evidence exists against it? What would I tell a close friend who is thinking this way? What is the most realistic outcome here? Not the best case, not the worst case, but the actual most likely outcome? You're not trying to arrive at optimism. You're trying to arrive at accuracy. Anxious thinking is systematically skewed toward danger. Realistic thinking pulls the needle back toward the actual probability distribution of outcomes, which, for most of what we worry about, looks far less catastrophic than our anxiety claims. Language that creates distance. There is a deceptively powerful technique called cognitive diffusion that works through a tiny change in language. Instead of thinking, "I'm going to fail," you think, "I'm having the thought that I'm going to fail." This one-sentence wrapper transforms your relationship to the thought entirely. Before, you were inside the thought, experiencing it as reality. After, you are observing the thought from a step removed, experiencing it as a mental event. Something your brain is generating, not something the universe is declaring. Thoughts feel like truths when you're fused with them. They feel like thoughts, impermanent, malleable, just one possible interpretation among many. When you learn to hold them at arm's length, you are not your thoughts. You are the mind that notices them. That distinction alone will take you further than 100 techniques ever could. The art of strategic indifference. This chapter is built around an idea that will feel counterintuitive, maybe even dangerous at first. Give it a chance. The most effective thing you can do with anxious thoughts is stop finding them interesting, not suppress them, not argue with them, not replace them. Just decline to engage. Treat them the way you'd treat a pop-up ad on your phone. You see it. You don't click it. You don't call the number. You don't send your credit card details. You just let it sit there, annoying, irrelevant, ultimately powerless, until it goes away on its own. This is what we mean by strategic indifference. Anxiety requires your engagement to survive. It needs you to take the simulation seriously. Every time you respond to an anxious thought with urgency, trying to solve it, disprove it, escape from it. You are feeding it. You are confirming at the neurological level that this thought is important enough to respond to, which tells your brain, keep generating these. They're working. The moment you stop responding with urgency, the moment you can look at an anxious thought and genuinely think, oh, there's that old program running again, the feedback loop breaks. Mental detachment explained. Simply, detachment is not coldness. It is not indifference to the people and things you love. It is not spiritual bypassing or pretending that outcomes don't matter. Detachment is the difference between preference and need. A preference. I'd really like this presentation to go well. You care, you prepare, you do your best. And if it goes imperfectly, you deal with it. Your fundamental sense of okayness is not on the line. A need. This presentation must go perfectly, or I am in serious danger. Now, every imperfection is an emergency. Every critical question from the audience is a threat. Your nervous system is fully activated, and you are performing while simultaneously fighting a biochemical anxiety response, which, predictably, makes the performance worse. Anxiety lives in needs. Peace lives in preferences. The shift from needing outcomes to preferring them is one of the most liberating moves available to you. And it doesn't require caring less about your life. It requires trusting more in your ability to handle whatever your life produces. The other people problem. One of the most reliable anxiety generators is the attempt to control other people's behavior, reactions, and opinions. This is almost always unconscious. We spend enormous mental energy trying to manage how others perceive us, trying to anticipate their reactions, trying to preemptively adjust our behavior to avoid their disapproval. It doesn't work. It has never worked. Other people will think what they think, feel what they feel, and do what they do, largely independent of your anticipatory management. And here's what the attempt costs you. It takes you completely out of your own experience and into a permanent, exhausting performance. You're not living your life. You're monitoring their response to your life. True detachment in relationships means fully engaging with people while releasing the need to control their inner experience. You can be kind, honest, generous, and loving, and still accept that what others do with that is their domain, not yours. Building a home inside yourself. Most anxiety, if you follow it far enough back to its root, arrives at the same place. A fundamental feeling that you are not safe. Not unsafe in the environment, unsafe in yourself. Unsure that you can handle what comes. Unsure that you have the internal resources to survive disappointment, rejection, failure, or loss without falling apart completely. This is the core wound that anxiety circles endlessly. And no amount of breathing techniques or thought reframing will resolve it permanently unless you address this. You need to become someone you trust. The evidence. You've been ignoring your anxious mind has a highly selective memory. It catalogs every mistake, every awkward moment, every time something went wrong with extraordinary precision. What it systematically forgets or dismisses as luck, coincidence, or insufficient proof are the hundreds of times you handled something hard and survived. Think back, not to your proudest moments or greatest achievements. Think of the ordinary hard things, the difficult conversation you had and made it through, the period of uncertainty you navigated, the loss you survived, the setback you recovered from, the thing you were absolutely sure you couldn't handle, and then did. That evidence is real. It is a documented history of your actual resilience, and your anxiety has been redacting it. Building self-trust isn't about convincing yourself you're exceptional. It's about accurately accounting for the track record you already have. You've handled hard things before. The probability that you can handle hard things again is, statistically, very high. The inner voice problem for many people with anxiety. The voice inside their head is not a friend. It's a prosecutor. It points out every flaw before anyone else can. It undermines confidence before confidence has a chance to build. It narrates mistakes in real time and replays them in high definition afterward. It speaks in the vocabulary of threat and inadequacy, on loop, and it is so familiar that most people don't even register it as something separate from themselves. It feels like thinking. But it isn't neutral thinking. It's a running commentary that has been deeply shaped by every critical voice you absorbed from every authority figure you ever trusted when you were too young to know you had a choice. You can change this relationship, not by forcing positivity over the top of it. That just creates noise. By beginning to talk back to it with the voice of someone who actually cares about you. What would you say to a close friend who made the mistake you're currently destroying yourself for? You would probably say something honest and kind, something that acknowledged the reality without amplifying it into catastrophe, something that reminded them of their capacity and expressed genuine belief in their ability to learn and move forward. That voice is available to you. For yourself, it requires practice, but it becomes, over time, the dominant voice, and when it does, anxiety loses its most reliable internal amplifier. Boundaries as architecture. Anxiety frequently spikes in environments where you feel powerless, where other people's emergencies routinely become your emergencies, where your time and energy are up for grabs without your consent, where saying no feels so dangerous that you'd rather exhaust yourself than attempt it. Clear boundaries are not selfishness. They are the architecture of a sustainable life. They are the structures that make it possible to show up fully for the things and people that genuinely matter to you without being permanently depleted by everything else. Every time you establish and hold a healthy boundary, you are doing something your nervous system desperately needs. You are demonstrating to yourself that you have power over your own experience, that you are not simply at the mercy of every external demand, that your energy, your time, and your emotional landscape belong to you first. This, over time, is deeply calming, not because the world becomes less demanding, but because you become someone who can meet its demands on your own terms. The physical foundation of safety. Inner safety is also unavoidably a physical matter. A body that is chronically underslept, poorly nourished, caffeine-saturated, and never moved is a body running in a permanent state of low-grade stress. And a body in low-grade stress is a mind predisposed to anxiety. This isn't complicated advice. Sleep is not a luxury. Food is not just fuel. Movement is not optional if your goal is a calm mind. These aren't lifestyle suggestions from a wellness brand. They are foundational requirements for a nervous system that can regulate itself. Before you invest in any advanced mental technique, invest in the basics. A well-rested, well-nourished, regularly moved body is one of the most powerful anxiety interventions available to you, and it is entirely within your control. The emotional weather system. Your emotions are not problems to be solved. They are weather. This metaphor is worth sitting with. Weather is real. It affects your experience. Some of it is uncomfortable. None of it is permanent. You cannot control it. You can prepare for it, dress appropriately for it, choose how you respond to it. But you cannot stop it from arriving, and you cannot argue it out of existence. The moment you try to stop an emotion from occurring, to lock down, suppress, or white-knuckle your way through without actually feeling it, you are making it worse. Suppressed emotions don't disappear. They get stored in your muscles, in your posture, in your nervous system. They become a background tension that makes the next emotional event more intense because the previous one was never fully discharged. The rain method. When a difficult emotion like anxiety arrives, Try this four-step approach. Recognize. Simply name what you're experiencing. I notice I'm feeling anxious. This is not a small thing. Naming an emotion activates the prefrontal cortex, the rational brain, and slightly decreases the activity in the amygdala. The simple act of labeling your emotional state moves you toward regulation. Allow. Let the emotion be present without immediately trying to fix, escape, or redirect it. This is the hard step. Everything in you will want to do something. Think your way out, distract yourself, reach for your phone. Instead, just allow the feeling to exist. You are not agreeing that it's rational. You are not deciding to stay in it forever. You are simply not fighting it. Investigate. Turn your attention to where the emotion lives in your body. Anxiety commonly lives in the chest, stomach, throat, or jaw. Notice the sensation without narrating a story about it. Just physical awareness. Where is it? What does it feel like? Is it moving? Changing? Non-attachment. Observe the emotion the way you'd observe a cloud from an airplane. You can see it. You are not inside it. You are the awareness that notices it passing through. You are not the anxiety. You are the mind that is watching anxiety arise and, eventually, pass. The window, you need to stay. Psychologists describe what they call the window of tolerance, the zone of nervous system activation in which you can think clearly, feel your emotions without being overwhelmed, and respond thoughtfully rather than reactively. When anxiety pushes you above this window, you feel chaotic, flooded, panicky, unable to think straight. When chronic stress pushes you below it, you feel numb, disconnected, shut down. Both are outside the window. Learning to recognize when you're being pushed toward either edge and having a toolkit for returning to center is one of the most practical emotional intelligence skills you can develop. Breathing works, grounding works, physical movement works, social connection works. The specific tool matters less than the habit of noticing when you need one. The hidden gift of difficult emotions. This is the piece most anxiety management systems miss entirely. Your difficult emotions contain real information. Anxiety sometimes is actually picking up on something real, not a catastrophe, not a justification for a full stress response, but a real quiet signal. I'm in the wrong job. This relationship isn't working. Something needs to change. There's something important I've been avoiding. The goal is not to eliminate your emotional sensitivity. It's to build the capacity to hear these signals without being knocked over by them, to feel the feeling, extract the information, and respond with intention rather than reacting with overwhelm. Emotions are not your enemies. They are your oldest form of intelligence. The problem has never been feeling them. The problem has been not knowing how to hold them without being consumed. Fear as a map. Most people treat fear as a wall. They run into it, they bounce back, and they conclude that whatever is on the other side must be impassable. What fear actually is, in the vast majority of cases, is a map. It's pointing at something, not away from something, toward an edge you haven't crossed yet, toward a version of yourself that hasn't been fully expressed, toward something that matters enough to be frightening. Fear points toward what matters. Your fears are not random. They cluster around your values. If you're afraid of public speaking, it's because how others see you matters to you. If you're afraid of failure in your career, it's because achievement and contribution are central to your identity. If you're afraid of being alone, it's because connection and belonging are core needs for you. These aren't weaknesses, they're maps of your values. And your values are the most reliable compass you have for where your energy belongs. Instead of asking, how do I make this fear go away, try asking, what does this fear tell me about what I care about, And what would I do with my life if I trusted myself enough to pursue it anyway? The fear audit. Take 10 minutes. Write down your 5 most persistent fears. For each one, answer these questions. What is this fear trying to protect me from? What does it suggest I value deeply? If I weren't held back by this, what would I do? What skill or knowledge or experience would make me more confident in this area? You just turned a vague, overwhelming emotional experience into specific, actionable intelligence. That is not a small accomplishment. Most people live their entire lives running from fears they've never once sat down and looked at directly. The outdated bodyguard. Many of the fears that control adult behavior were developed by children making completely rational decisions about how to survive in environments where they had very little power. The child who learned to be invisible to avoid an unpredictable parent's anger becomes the adult with social anxiety. The child who was shamed for expressing needs becomes the adult who can't ask for help. The child who was only valued for performance becomes the adult who can't rest without earning it first. These adaptations were intelligent. They worked. They kept you safe in the specific conditions under which they were developed. But you are not in those conditions anymore. The bodyguard is still doing its job, but the threat it was hired to protect you from no longer exists. And its methods, which were appropriate then, are costing you far more than they're protecting you from now. Learning to thank these old protections for their service, genuinely without resentment, because they did their job, while consciously stepping past them into new ways of responding, is some of the deepest and most liberating work a person can do. Courage is not the absence of fear. The goal of this chapter, of this entire book, is not to make you fearless. That is not a realistic goal, and it wouldn't serve you if it were achieved. The goal is to make you someone who acts from their values rather than from their fears, who feels the fear, acknowledges it honestly, extracts whatever real information it contains, and then moves anyway. Not because the fear disappeared, because the thing on the other side of it matters more than the discomfort of facing it. Every time you do this, every single time you feel afraid and move forward anyway, you are building a specific kind of neural capital, evidence of your own capacity, a growing library of times you thought you couldn't and did. This library becomes, over time, the foundation of genuine confidence, not performed confidence. The real kind, quietly earned, impossible to fake, and completely immune to anxiety's claims that you won't be able to handle it. You already have entries in this library. You're about to add more. Becoming unbreakable resilience is a word that gets used so often it has almost lost its meaning, so let's be precise about what we're talking about. Resilience is not the ability to avoid being knocked down. Everyone gets knocked down. Resilience is the ability to look at the ground from close up, understand exactly what tripped you, and get back up with better information than you had before the fall. It is not toughness in the sense of feeling nothing. It is not stoicism in the sense of performing fine when you're not. It is the deeply practical capacity to be genuinely disrupted by life, to grieve, to struggle, to fail, to be surprised by difficulty, and to find your way back to yourself afterward, every single time. The mindset architecture. One of the strongest predictors of resilience is what psychologists call growth mindset, the belief that your abilities, responses, and emotional patterns are not fixed traits, but developing capacities. That struggle is information, not verdict. That failure is a data point, not an identity. If you operate from a fixed mindset, every challenge becomes a test of whether you're inherently adequate. Fail the test, and you've proven something terrible about yourself. This is why fixed mindset people often avoid challenges entirely. The stakes of failure are too high to risk. In a growth mindset, challenges are simply hard experiences that will, eventually, teach you something worth knowing. You're not trying to prove you're capable, you're in the process of becoming more capable. That process looks messy from the inside. It's supposed to. Don't put all your identity eggs in one basket. One of the structural mistakes that makes people especially vulnerable to anxiety and setback is building your entire sense of self around a single domain. Your career, a relationship, your physical appearance, a specific role. When that domain is threatened, and all of them at some point will be, your entire identity is on the line. And when your identity feels threatened, your nervous system responds as if your survival is threatened. Because, in a psychological sense, it is. Resilient people cultivate what we might call a diversified identity. They are a parent and a professional and a friend and a creator and a person who is interested in things and working on themselves. When one aspect of their life becomes difficult, the others remain. The whole self doesn't collapse because one part of the self is under pressure. The setback. Debrief. One of the most practical resilience habits is learning to treat every significant setback as a debrief-worthy event. Not a verdict on your worth, a situation to be analyzed for information. After something hard happens, ask, what did I handle well in this? What do I wish I'd done differently? What did this teach me about myself, about the situation, about what I value? How can I use this going forward? This is not toxic positivity. Everything happens for a reason. This is strategic learning. You went through something hard. You might as well extract everything it has to teach you so it cost you experience and knowledge, not just pain. The role of other people, social connection is not a bonus feature of human experience. It is a core nervous system need. Humans co-regulate. In the presence of a safe, attuned person, your nervous system actually synchronizes with theirs. Heart rate, breathing rhythm, cortisol levels, moving toward their state. This is why being with someone calm when you're anxious helps in a way that being alone with anxious thoughts does not. You don't need a large social network. The research is consistent. What predicts resilience is not the quantity, but the quality of relationships. One person who truly knows you, accepts you, and will be honest with you is worth more, neurologically speaking, than 20 people who know only the version of you that you've decided is safe to show. Invest in those relationships. Protect the time they require. Be willing to be actually known by the people who matter to you, not just liked, not just appreciated, but known. It is one of the greatest gifts you can give your nervous system, and theirs. The mind as architect. Your imagination is either working for you or against you. There is no neutral option. Right now, at this very moment, your brain is simulating possible futures. It's running probability assessments, filling in unknowns with guesses, generating emotional previews of events that haven't happened yet. This is not optional. Your brain does this automatically, constantly, as part of its core operating function. The question is, what are you imagining? What futures is your mind rehearsing? What outcomes is it encoding as familiar and expected? If the answer is catastrophes, then you are, with great neural efficiency, preparing yourself to expect and experience catastrophe. If the answer is capable, grounded responses to life's challenges, then you are preparing something very different. The neuroscience of rehearsal here is a fact that will change how you think about imagination. Your brain cannot reliably distinguish between a vividly imagined experience and a real one. This has been demonstrated in study after study. Athletes who vividly visualize performing a skill activate nearly identical neural pathways as athletes who physically practice it. People who repeatedly imagine themselves responding calmly to stressful situations begin to encode those calm responses as default patterns. You are always practicing something with your imagination. The question is whether you're practicing anxiety or composure, visualizing from the inside out. Most people, when they try to use visualization, make a critical mistake. They watch themselves from the outside, like a movie. This creates psychological distance. It's a spectator experience. Effective mental rehearsal happens from the inside. You are in your body, looking out through your own eyes. You feel the sensations in your muscles. You hear the sounds around you. You feel your breath moving at the steady pace of someone who is calm and capable. You're not watching yourself handle the situation. You are handling it in full sensory detail. This is the difference between imagining a swim and feeling the water. The sanctuary. One of the most immediately useful visualization practices is building a mental sanctuary, a place that exists only inside your mind, that you design specifically to be a space of complete safety and calm. This can be anywhere. A real place you've been that brought you peace, or an entirely constructed environment. A cabin in the mountains, a sun-warmed beach at an uncrowded hour, a library in the late afternoon, a garden. It doesn't matter where. What matters is that you build it in extraordinary detail. The quality of the light, the sounds, the temperature of the air, the specific way it feels to be there, and that you practice entering it deliberately until your nervous system learns to recognize it as a cue for relaxation. Once this association is established, accessing your sanctuary takes seconds. Your nervous system has been trained to shift states on arrival, the way some people immediately relax when they walk through their front door at home. You become, in a very real neurological sense, portable. Your calm is available to you anywhere because you carry it with you. The Master Control Panel. We've covered thought patterns, emotional regulation, visualization, breathing, boundaries, resilience. But all of these ultimately are working on the same underlying system, your nervous system. And understanding that system at a deeper level gives you access to a kind of regulation that feels less like effort and more like expertise. The 3 floors of your nervous system, polyvagal theory, developed by neuroscientist Stephen Porges and now foundational to trauma-informed approaches to mental health, describes not 2, but 3 operating states of the human nervous system. The first and most sophisticated is what Porges calls the ventral vagal state. This is the state of safety and social connection. When you're here, you feel calm without being flat, open without being naive, connected to others, able to think clearly, able to feel your emotions without being overwhelmed by them. This is your home base. This is where all the best of human experience happens. The second state is the sympathetic state, mobilization, fight or flight. When you're here, you have energy, but it's threat energy. Your system is activated and looking for danger. Anxiety lives here, or in the cycling between this state and the first one. The third state is the dorsal vagal state, shutdown. When threat feels truly overwhelming, the system collapses inward. This is numbness, disconnection, the feeling of not being fully present in your own life. Most anxiety is happening in the sympathetic state or in the rapid cycling between sympathetic activation and attempts to return to ventral vagal safety. The vagus nerve, your internal reset cable. The vagus nerve, the longest cranial nerve in your body, running from your brain down through your neck, heart, lungs, and abdomen, is the primary pathway of the parasympathetic system and the central highway of the ventral vagal state. Stimulating the vagus nerve is one of the most direct ways to shift your nervous system toward calm. Several practical tools for doing this: humming or singing. The vibration of sustained vocalization stimulates the vagus nerve directly. 5 minutes of humming your favorite song is not a trivial relaxation technique. It is a genuine nervous system regulation intervention. The physiological sigh, a full inhale, followed immediately by a second short inhale to fully expand the lungs, followed by a long, slow exhale. This pattern is the fastest known breathing intervention for reducing physiological anxiety markers. It is what your body does spontaneously during emotional relief. A sigh of relief is your body's built-in reset move. Social engagement, looking into the eyes of a safe person, hearing a familiar warm voice, laughing, being touched gently and with permission. All of these activate the ventral vagal state because the ventral vagal system evolved specifically for safe social connection. When your body registers the presence of a safe other, it downregulates threat responses automatically. Cold water on the face activates the dive reflex, slowing heart rate and triggering a rapid parasympathetic shift. Building regulation into your day. The goal is not to become someone who is never activated. It is to become someone who cycles through activation efficiently and returns to baseline reliably. Build regulation into your day the way you build hygiene into your day, not as a response to crisis, but as maintenance. Morning breathing, a midday walk, evening ritual that signals the transition to rest. Not because you're falling apart and need to fix it, because you are a biological organism who performs better, thinks more clearly, responds more wisely, feels more fully alive when your nervous system is tended to. This is not self-indulgence. This is the infrastructure of a functional mind. The voice in the room. There is a conversation happening inside you right now. It never fully stops. Sometimes it's narrating what you're doing. Sometimes it's planning, rehearsing, reviewing. Sometimes it is catastrophizing, criticizing, predicting your failure with the serene confidence of someone who considers the matter already settled. This voice, your inner dialogue, is the single most influential factor in determining whether your daily experience trends toward anxiety or toward peace. And almost no one consciously chooses what it says. Changing the channel. Your inner dialogue is not a single voice. It is a broadcasting station running multiple programs, most of which you inherited rather than chose, absorbed from parents, teachers, coaches, cultural messaging, and every meaningful relationship you've ever been inside. The anxious program sounds something like this. You should have done that differently. What if they're judging you? Why can't you just be normal? You're going to mess this up. You always do. It runs on a loop. It has excellent production value, meaning it sounds convincing, authoritative, and entirely specific to your particular soft spots. The first act of changing it is simply recognizing it as a program, not your inherent truth, not reality's verdict on you, a channel you can, with practice, choose not to leave on. Questions as architecture. The quality of your inner life is determined to a surprising degree by the quality of the questions you habitually ask yourself. Anxious questions are structurally skewed toward threat. Why do I always do this? What if everything falls apart? Why can't I ever get this right? Notice the architecture. These questions do not have good answers. They are designed, not consciously but functionally, to produce more anxiety, not less. They confirm the fear without investigating it. Wise questions are structurally oriented toward possibility and learning. What is one thing I could do right now? What would a person I respect do in this situation? What's the most realistic version of how this unfolds? What can I learn from this? These questions have actual answers. They lead somewhere. They require your brain to engage differently, not in threat scanning, but in problem solving. The same nervous system, completely different outputs depending on the question. The compassionate inner voice. One of the most well-documented findings in psychological research is that self-compassion, treating yourself with the same basic kindness you would offer a struggling friend, predicts better mental health outcomes than self-esteem alone. Self-esteem, it turns out, is fragile. It depends on performance, on comparison, on external validation. It goes up when things are going well and crashes when they aren't. It is, ironically, deeply tied to anxiety, because the higher your self-esteem is riding, the more anxious you may be about something coming along to knock it down. Self-compassion doesn't depend on performance. It is the simple recognition that you are a human being, imperfect, learning, sometimes struggling, always worthy of basic care. It doesn't require that you're winning. It only requires that you're here. When you make a mistake, what happens in your head? Most anxious people know this answer well. The inner critic launches. The analysis begins. The verdict is delivered before the defense has had a chance to speak. What if, instead, the first response was something like, "That was hard. I didn't handle that perfectly. That's okay. What do I need right now, and what do I want to do differently next time?" Not a lower standard, not an excuse, just the basic human decency of acknowledging that you're doing the best you can with what you have, and that doing your best in a complicated world occasionally means falling short and learning from it. The last transformation, techniques fade, strategies get forgotten under pressure, but a fundamental identity shift, a change in who you understand yourself to be, is nearly permanent. This is what the final stage of anxiety mastery looks like. Not someone who has collected a large toolkit for managing symptoms. Someone who has become, at their core, a different kind of person in relationship to fear, uncertainty, and challenge. The identity leverage. Here is something worth understanding about identity. Your brain is heavily invested in behavioral consistency with who you believe yourself to be. If you believe you are someone who struggles with anxiety, your mind will unconsciously generate thoughts, interpretations, and behaviors that are consistent with that belief. Not because it's trying to sabotage you, because it is trying to be coherent, to keep your experience matching your self-concept. This cuts both ways. If you begin to genuinely believe, not as a mantra you repeat, but as an honest, earned conviction that you are someone who is learning to master their inner world, your mind will begin to generate thoughts and behaviors consistent with that identity instead. Identity doesn't shift through positive thinking. It shifts through accumulated evidence. Every time you feel anxious and respond skillfully, breathe, ground, observe the thought without fusing with it, move forward anyway, you are depositing evidence for the new identity. Every repetition deepens the neural pattern. Every skillful response makes the next one slightly more automatic. You are not trying to become someone completely different. You are trying to give the part of you that has always been capable of this more practice, more authority, and more airtime than the part that has been running on anxious autopilot. Healing the past without becoming its prisoner. True transformation requires more than cognitive rewiring. It requires acknowledging, with genuine compassion, the experiences that created your anxiety patterns in the first place. You did not develop anxiety randomly. You developed it intelligently, in response to real conditions that genuinely warranted vigilance. The anxious patterns that now cost you so much were, at some point, adaptive. They served you. They kept you safe in environments where you had little power and incomplete information. Acknowledging this, not to excuse the patterns or resign yourself to them, but to understand them, transforms your relationship to your own anxiety. You stop treating it as an enemy and start relating to it as an old, outdated protection that you are now, gently and consistently, retiring. You thank it for its service. You show it that the world it was built to survive no longer requires those methods. And you build, deliberately and patiently, the new responses appropriate to the life you're actually living now. Environmental design. Your environment is shaping your internal state continuously, and mostly without your awareness. The information you consume, the people whose presence is the backdrop of your daily life, the physical spaces where you spend your hours, the quality of light, the level of noise, the presence or absence of nature. All of it is a continuous input stream to your nervous system, pushing it gently toward activation or toward calm. Most anxious people have never consciously designed their environment with their nervous system in mind. They consume whatever content the algorithm offers. They spend time with whoever makes demands on their schedule. They live in whatever spaces they ended up in for practical reasons. What would it mean to design your environment the way a high-performance athlete designs their training conditions? Deliberately, intentionally, with an understanding of what your particular nervous system needs to operate at its best. This doesn't require dramatic life changes. It might mean 1 hour less of news consumption daily. One relationship that brings drama renegotiated toward more honest terms. One room in your home made genuinely restful. Small, consistent environmental inputs in the direction of calm accumulate, over time, into a different nervous system baseline. The most important homecoming. At the far end of all the techniques, all the neural rewiring, all the identity work, all the emotional regulation practice, there is a destination. And it is not, as most anxiety books imply, a state of permanent calm. It is you, the actual you. Chronic anxiety is, in many of its most persistent forms, the experience of being in conflict with your own nature, performing a version of yourself that doesn't match who you actually are at a cost your nervous system registers but your conscious mind has learned to ignore. Maintaining an image, meeting a standard, occupying a role, all of which require the continuous expenditure of energy that your system was never designed to sustain indefinitely. The performance and its price. Most people develop a version of themselves for public consumption very early in life. They learn, through the clear and consistent feedback of childhood, which parts of them are welcomed and which are not, which emotions are acceptable, which ambitions are safe, which aspects of their personality bring approval and which bring disapproval or silence. The adaptation is intelligent. Children need to belong. Belonging requires conforming, at least partially, to the expectations of the tribe. And so the authentic self learns to stay quiet while the adapted self takes the stage. In adulthood, this adapted self often runs on autopilot. You may have forgotten entirely that there's a difference between the person you perform and the person you actually are. The performance has become so familiar, so practiced, so automatic, that it simply feels like personality. The anxiety you feel is, in part, the cost of that performance. The continuous low-level expenditure of monitoring yourself, adjusting yourself, managing others' perceptions of you, and keeping certain parts of your genuine nature off stage. Authenticity as anxiety resolution. This is the deepest and most counterintuitive insight in this entire book. Anxiety often dissolves, not when you manage it better, but when you become more genuinely yourself. When the gap between who you are and who you're presenting closes, when your external life begins to align with your internal truth, a natural, structural calm becomes available. Not because the challenges of life disappear, but because you stop fighting yourself on top of fighting everything else. This process requires courage, The authentic self has been kept off stage for good reasons. There were real consequences, real disapproval, real threats associated with its expression. Bringing it back out involves genuine risk. But consider what the alternative costs you. Every day of inauthenticity is a day of friction, of expenditure, of low-level existential unease. The anxiety that you think is about your circumstances is often, underneath, about the distance between who you are and who you're pretending to be. Small acts of returning. You don't reclaim your authentic self all at once. You do it in small, consistent acts of genuine expression. You share an opinion that's actually yours, rather than the one you calculated would land well. You say no to something that depletes you, even though saying yes would be easier. You allow yourself to be interested in what you're genuinely interested in, rather than what seems like the right thing to be interested in. You let someone important to you see something real, a doubt, a hope, a struggle, instead of the performance you usually offer. These are small. They feel enormous because the false self resists them with everything it has. Your nervous system may interpret each act of authenticity as a threat because for a long time, genuine self-expression came with real social costs. But each small act of returning to yourself deposits something in a different account. Evidence that you can be seen for who you actually are and survive. Evidence that the right people, the right circumstances, the right opportunities respond to the real you, not the performance. Over time, this evidence accumulates into something remarkable. The quiet, unshakable, utterly unglamorous confidence of someone who has stopped pretending. The final truth, anxiety at its most fundamental, is the experience of being at war with something. The future, the past, other people's opinions, your own nature, the basic uncertainty of being alive. Peace is not the absence of challenge. It is the cessation of that war. You cannot find peace by conquering anxiety. You find it by withdrawing from the conflict, by deciding gradually and then suddenly and then permanently that you are not interested in being afraid of your own life anymore. That the simulation your brain runs of catastrophic futures is not worth attending to with the urgency of an emergency. That the voice that says you're not enough has been running long enough without being cross-examined. That the person you've been performing deserves, finally, to take a rest. And the person underneath deserves, finally, to come home. This is not the end of difficulty, it is the end of unnecessary suffering, and the distance between those two things is the entire space of a good life, available to you right now, in the only moment that has ever existed. Right now.